Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's show of My Great Aunt Edna, the leadership show that focuses on excellence, doing things the right way, no shortcuts, and accountability. I'm your host, Mac McNeil, and today's special guest is David Stillman. David is a generational expert, consultant, and international speaker. You'll hear from David on how he utilizes his strategies to help organizations better connect and have better business results. Enough said. Let's get to it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the leadership show called My Great Aunt Edna, the leadership show that focuses on excellence, doing things the right way, no shortcuts, and accountability. I'm your host, Mac McNeil, and today we have a special guest, Mr. David Stillman. And David is a generational expert and internationally acclaimed keynote speaker, author, and consultant. For almost 25 years, he has been called on by business executives, politicians, and the media to share his expertise on how best to bridge generational gaps between boomers, Xers, millennials, and now Gen Z. David is a co-author of 3 best-selling books, including When Generations Collide and The M Factor, How the Millennial Generation is Rocking the Workplace. His latest book, Gen Z at Work, was co-authored with his Gen Z son, Jonah. David has appeared on CNN, CNBC, The Today Show, and NPR, as well as featured in Fast Company, The New York Times, USA Today, and The Wall Street Journal, and now My Great Aunt Edna podcast. The Business Journal named David as one of 200 people to watch, and he was also awarded as one of the Power 50 in his home state of Minnesota. Success Magazine named David as one of the top 25 most influential speakers of the decade. And that last piece is why I'm so intrigued to have him on the show. So David, welcome to the show, and thank you for being a part of My Great Aunt Edna.
Well, thank you, Mac. I'm really honored to be here, truly. And, to be a part of Aunt Edna's legacy, that's pretty cool. And I've loved following your work as well. So I think this is going to be an exciting conversation.
Thank you, David. So, I'm a little curious. I know a little bit about you, what you're about, where you've come from, but, enlighten the listeners out there. Tell them a little bit more about yourself, what you do, what inspires you.
So I have one of those people, just a niche career that's been focusing on generational differences. So as you mentioned, the differences, and we started with baby boomers, but when I got into it, there was even a generation, in full force in our workforce, the traditionalists.
Right.
There's a silent generation, baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. And what I love is, it really is a form of diversity, no different than, we look at race, ethnicity, gender, all these different things. But what's been so wonderful about the generations topic, it's a little bit easier to talk about. A lot of those other forms of diversity are laden with a lot of political correctness.
Right.
And I find about generational differences, we don't have a lot of that. And so it really opens up the door for many diversity and inclusion conversations, of which generations is just one of them. But the nice thing about generational differences, it really does apply to everyone, because everyone's a member of a generation. And every generation has unique events and conditions that shape them, that result in a generational personality. And, we don't become more alike as we age. We become more entrenched in these generational personalities. And so that's what really excites me about this topic that I've dedicated my career to.
So that's interesting. And before I even get into my formal questions, you've already, got me interested in what you're talking about. And one of the things you mentioned is that, one, is that it's not as sensitive as some of the other diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives that we talk about. But 2, I love when you said at the very end of that you become more entrenched in it the older you get. And I'm finding that out myself. The older I get, I'm not going to throw my age out there, but I can sense it myself. So with those 2 things, and thinking about those 2 things that I just mentioned, like, how does that influence how you approach the conversation with multiple generations?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people will say to me, we've got a brand new generation, for example, Gen Z coming onto the scene. And I've had so many executives say to me, like, I'm going to wait to get to know them. And what
Mhm.
they're trying to say to me, Mac, is I'm going to wait till they become a little bit more like me. And the thing to realize is that because I've studied this for so long, is we all hit the same life stages. We maybe get married, or we have children, or we get a new
Mhm.
job, or we retire. And yes, every generation shares those life stages, but each generation comes at it or also reinvents that life stage because they're looking through a different lens. And so, the mistake to be made is to wait till we become, or think that we're going to become more alike. And so when I say we really entrenched in these generational personalities, what I find is the events and conditions that shape us during
Mhm.
our formative years, usually those years are between the ages of 12 and 20, really adopt a lens that we take in with us into every single life stage. So as a generation, we don't change, but how we hit that life stage might be brand new or different. And so for me, what's great is this form of diversity. It's alive and well. I've had a lot of people say, like, we're still talking about generations. It's like, of course we are, because each generation is like hitting a new life stage. And we also have new generations coming onto the scene. And not only in the workplace and leadership, which I know, and Edna is all about, but even as customers, how we relate to our customers as well in different
A good one.
industries.
It's a very good one. And I know, well, we didn't really prepare for this question, but I have to ask because this is so good already. But would you consider your discipline or your expertise in that discipline to be science or art?
Um, Both. I think there's a
Okay.
lot of people out there who could go read data and create their own art, whether it be, my art of interpretation.
Mhm.
I pride myself in owning my own primary research, because I could go read someone else's research and comment on it and hang a shingle up as a generational expert. No knock against those people, but
Right.
I run my own data all the time. And so I'm rooted in data. But then, having done it for so long, I think the art is, how do we look at the data?
Mhm.
And my niche has always been, there's people out there who study a generation and great generational experts specific to a generation. But my approach has always been, what happens when you put these generations together? And so that's
Right.
always been the space that I look at, is when you put these generations together. So, for example, we've got a new generation, Gen Z, entering the workplace and the marketplace. Well, that's exciting, but what does that mean for the other generations is sort of the place that I have found. And I find that to be the art. But to your point, I always like to root my findings in true data.
Great, great answer. That was
Yeah.
a great answer. And the way you explained the art of it made all the sense in the world to me. Like when you're bringing the two together, and then how you read that data that's presented. So let's backtrack a little bit. So how did you get into generational consultation, and how does leadership play a role in your approach?
So how I got into it is I graduated with a journalist degree and I was working as a reporter. And someone once said to me, "Hey, I want to do a story on Gen X." And at the time, I was in my 20s, and they literally said to me, "Is like, those Gen Xers who hang out in coffee shops and complain about bad hair all day." And I had put in like an 80-hour week, and I'm looking around like, I don't know about you, but I don't have time to complain about anything. And so I really felt that, like, Gen X, which was a generation that was truly negative stereotype with the grunge music and sort
Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
anti-establishment. And I was like, wow, a lot of stereotyping going on about Gen X, which led me to sort of look at, well, what shaped the other generations.
Hmm.
And what got me into it was this notion of, when Gen X, my generation, showed up, we were nothing like the baby boom generation. Everyone
Right.
tried to treat Gen X like the baby boom, and boom, big collisions. And so, it just sort of led me on this journey. And to lead into your second point, leadership is, I think, too often leadership, is looking through their own generational lens. And baby boomers were like, oh, they'll behave
Hmm.
and act just like us. Behaved and acted nothing like them, but not as a form of rebellion, but really because they had different events and conditions that shaped them. And so, from the form of leadership, I think, the savvy point is to be able to take off your own generational lens, the events and conditions that shaped another generation. But I'll tell you, Mac, and you and I have talked about this in previous conversations, too often what happens is the conversation goes around who's right, who's wrong, who's better,
Hmm.
who's worse. But yet the really savvy leaders are like, no one is better or worse or right or wrong. We're just different. So not only how do I understand these differences, but even more so, how do I leverage them? And I think that's the savvy leadership question.
Oh, that's great. I love that. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about my own leadership and my style of leadership. And I like to call myself a chameleon,
Yeah.
a Mac of all trades. I throw that in there, but it's because we have to adapt throughout the day because we're dealing with multiple generations and we have to be able to communicate. So I love what you just said right there. It's no one is right or wrong. We're just different. And so we have to approach some things different. Great explanation.
And I
So,
think savvy leadership, to your point, if we're working on an initiative, too often we only have one generation sitting around the table, and sometimes it's
mhm.
those who have the most tenure.
Oh,
You know,
that's good.
trying to do a recruitment strategy or a marketing strategy, and many of the things you do, and let's say you're targeting the younger generations, and then I go meet with them, and there's not one millennial or Gen Zer sitting around the table. Well, how in the heck do you expect, to be able to recruit, retain, or even market to those generations if you don't have that voice at the table? And part of being a chameleon is understanding the need to bring those voices to the table.
Yeah, outstanding, great. So, my great aunt Edna speaks of the spirit of excellence as a key ingredient in creating a great leadership culture. So, have you noticed any major differences between generations and how they think about and execute towards excellence?
Yeah, I think excellence, partly is it's a powerful word. If you say
Hmm.
excellent, every generation can share sort of this notion of it's, to your point, it's at the top of the chart. Say I want to be excellent. But what it means to be excellent is going to be different things. For a
Hmm.
baby boomer, excellence was really about like, I'm going to get to that corner office. I'm going
Hmm.
to have my nameplate on the door.
Right.
And maybe for a Gen Xer, it was a little bit more like, wow, I got my stuff done, but I was home in time for dinner. And I was also, an excellent dad and an excellent worker. And I think the smart, savvy question that Aunt Edna would appreciate is that what does excellence mean to each generation? And too often, someone will say, like, we demand excellence around here. And they're
Hmm.
looking through one generational lens versus taking the time to be like, what does excellence mean to all of us? Excellence to a millennial we know is about, helping people and planet. And
Yeah.
so, to a millennial might be like, well, how are we helping with the carbon footprint? How are we helping with, DE&I? And so I think, the definition of excellence is going to change throughout all the generations. And I think those are the savvy ones to say is that we're going to accept that excellence does mean something different to each generation. And again, back to where we started, Mac,
Hmm.
not right, wrong, better, or worse, but just truly different.
So, another great answer. And I'm thinking as a leader who, sits around the room, as you just said, with a bunch of people in the same generation, and you're trying to define excellence for your organization. And taking into consideration what you just said, that excellence means, different things for different generations. As a leader, how would you define excellence as a corporate goal if you have multiple variations of excellence or the opinions of excellence of what that is in an organization?
Well, it's a hard thing to answer because you're wanting to be able to. Sometimes people want to define excellence, whether it be
Hmm.
their value statement or their mission statement, and have it in one succinct sentence. And I
Right.
think give up on that, but rather be willing to have that conversation. What does excellence mean to all of us?
Yeah.
And look for those commonalities. No, excellence is going to be that I perform at my best.
Uh-huh.
Everyone's going to be willing to do that, but it might not mean we're willing to pay the same price for success,
Yeah.
nor should we have to. So I think that's where we find differences. But I think the goal to find one succinct mission statement where it means the same to everyone, which is a very boomer sort of trait.
Yep.
It's just not that easy.
Yeah.
And I think letting that go is going to be the harder thing, but yet the savvy technique.
Yeah. So you just helped me see a couple of things. One, you said it before I was getting ready to say it, but it's a boomer perspective, and even Gen Z. I mean, excuse me, Gen X. Our generation, we do it as well, trying to define, excellence for an organization with one viewpoint or one lens. But the provocative thing that you just stated is to give up on it. And I don't know how many top leaders today could actually do that, and then assess the progression of the organization if they did do that. That's a
And
provocative
I
statement.
respect that. I respect it in a lot of ways because I think what that starts to dabble into, in my opinion, Mac, is
Hmm.
legacy.
Yeah.
I've worked so long for a culture of excellence. And so
Yeah.
suddenly excellence has always meant something to me. And suddenly I feel that's challenged. And I think a lot of the boomers and, upper age Xers sort of feel like, well, my legacy might be threatened here. And that's a hard thing to give up. And I really respect that. But I think the savvy thing to realize is that, the goal is to maybe they'll wear your shoes of excellence, but maybe they'll make their own paths.
Great metaphor
Yeah.
there. All
Yeah.
right. Good one. So, and you've been a keynote speaker for various events. We already talked about a few of them already. But how often are you asked to speak to promoting one generational approach versus another?
I would never do it, to be honest with you, because it would go
Hmm.
against my philosophy that it's a one size fits all. I will
Hmm.
have somebody, ask me a question that's related to, there's a lot of attention right now on Gen Z, for example. It's a new generation. They're coming into the workplace. What do we need to do to get them on board? There's a war for talent, the path to success. We don't see people valuing the 4-year degree like it used to. So a lot
Hmm.
of attention around Gen Z. But by no means would I ever step up on a stage and be like, out with the old, in with the new, because
Hmm.
that would just be a big mistake. And that's a little bit more about revolution.
Right.
What I promote is evolution, being that we can learn a lot from our boomers and Xers and even millennials, but we have to be willing to evolve as Gen Z comes into the place. So to answer your question, I would never get on a stage or ever promote just one generational lens. I think,
Mhm.
as I mentioned, my niche has always been what happens when we bring these generations together.
Yeah, I love your approach, but you've never had an organization say, hey, we have a direction we want to go in. Can you help these Gen Zs understand what we're trying to say in their language to get them on board?
100%, because
Okay.
again, I would say to a Gen Zer, like, look, you might have a lot of ideas, you might ask why, but the way we do things, there's a lot of reason for it, where it sort of wakes up maybe a boomer or an Xer is like, well, that's the way it's always been done.
Yeah.
Say why, and if we don't have an answer, I think as Xers and boomers, we got to be willing to listen. Well, maybe we don't need to do it that way, and maybe there is a new way. And so, sure, there's always going to be a new generation that comes up and a new generation that wants to change the world, and it's not a bad thing. But
Hmm.
if we're going to do things the way it's always been done, just because of that, which is very not only boomer, before boomer, traditionalist thinking.
Yeah.
Give an example. Take the field of law firms. The path to success is you come in, you're
Hmm.
associate, you put in your time, and you work so you can become a partner.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
a lot of the younger generation came in and they watched partners never making it home in time for dinner, giving their lives to a firm. Maybe
Hmm.
they made more money and then they became partner. And then the younger generations came in and said, well, I want to contribute. I want to work hard, but I don't care if I'm partner. And suddenly the
Hmm.
older generations were like, well, I don't know how to promote you because there's only been one path there. It's to partnership. And so,
Yeah.
there's fields that are very traditional. And I think that's where, we have to be willing to say, well, maybe the way it's always been done doesn't work. But because someone doesn't want to become partner doesn't mean that they're not driven, doesn't mean that they're a
Right.
wimp. And it doesn't mean for sure that they can't be successful.
So I'm gonna throw a curveball at you right here.
Okay.
4-day work week. The conversation has picked up about that definitely in the last couple of years because of the pandemic, but even previously because Europe had been doing it in variations. Um, who do you think is driving that? Do you think that's a Gen Z thing? Do you think the Boomers are maybe thinking through it from an expense standpoint? But who do you think is driving that?
It's a great question. I think a couple of things. I think, from a generational front, I think you've got boomers that still want to contribute to the
Hmm.
workplace, but maybe don't want to work the same way. So, sure. And then you have Gen Z that doesn't believe that work is a place. And I'll dig a little bit more into it. But I think the
Hmm.
overriding factor is really that would be one of the results of the pandemic. And, one of the things that I have done is studied how did the pandemic change the generations. And one of the biggest things it did is, work is no longer a place. We can work
Hmm.
anywhere.
Yeah.
And for
Yeah.
for a lot of boomers and extras, Mac, the model was work-life balance. And what
Right.
that really meant was you work from 9 to 5, and
Mhm.
then, 5 onward is your life. And the younger generations came along and been like, well, that doesn't work because people are still emailing me after 5. And to be honest, in the middle of the day, I maybe went and did yoga, or I,
Mm,
uploaded tennis shoes to a website where I'm selling stuff. And so this notion of work-life balance, where there's work and then there's life, didn't work. And so I
mm,
think what a lot of people have done, what I call is work-life blend, and that is work and
good.
life come together.
Yeah.
It's 24/7. And so I think, we're seeing less and less of that 9 to 5 mentality, but it doesn't mean
Hmm.
people are working less. It might means we're going into an office, so where there's a place, the 4-day week. But I don't think we're going to a thing where we only work 4 days a week and then we're playing, or living the rest. I think it's
Hmm.
really more of what we're seeing is that's language for what I call this work life blend, where work and life is 24/7, 7 days a week. And what it's forcing managers to do, Mac, is focus less on a 4-day week and so many hours and focus more on performance. And that is, if you're getting the job done, whether
Hmm.
that be 5 days a week, 4 days a week, 3 days a week, that's what matters. And so it's harder for a lot of boomers and Xers who are measured by how many hours you're showing up at a
Yep. Yep.
place. And I think, so the 4-day work week, I've been asked a lot about it in the media, and you and I were talking about that. I sort of feel that it's a stepping stone to a larger conversation around
Mhm.
work life blend versus work life balance.
Love your answer. And again, you said something that was provocative that caused me to think. And you were saying that it's not that they work less, but that's the perception.
Absolutely.
That is the perception from a lot of the leaders is that, they want to work 4 days a week. They're not really doing anything. What the hell are they doing? I don't know where they are half the time. I have people that want to work from London and so on and so forth. How can I keep tabs on them if it's, a 9 hour, 8 hour time difference, those kind of things. But the perception is that that younger generation wants to work less. And what you're saying is it's not that they want to work less, they just want to work differently.
100%. And I've had a lot of conversations with, they want to work less. And I'll be like, well, how's their performance? Are they getting the job done? And they almost feel stumped. They're like, oh, well, yeah, but I don't see them, and this is no knock on a lot of baby boomers. The time you got to the office was 10 minutes before your boss, and the
Yep,
time you
yep,
left the office was 10 minutes after your boss.
yep.
And so, like, life, work life was really based on, do I see you? And again,
Mhm.
it's one of the things the pandemic sort of disappeared. Everyone thought, like, oh, we won't be as productive. We actually found a lot of productivity in a lot of industries go up
Mhm.
because I got to work where I wanted and how I wanted. And so in those situations, I can't fault a lot of baby boomers, especially because they were always sort of, critiqued, or their feedback and even their compensation was based on how hard you're working, which was based on how often do I see you?
Yeah,
And that's just gone away.
I like it. Great answer, and your expertise is just showing in how you're answering it. So I'm getting excited already. So, who has been the major influence in your own approach to leadership, and was there a significant generational gap between the two of you?
Yeah, I would say my earliest aha was with a baby boomer, Lynn Lancaster, and she and
Hmm.
I, partnered forever. And she was raised in that boomer mentality based on tenure. You're in a position 3 years, and then you go higher. And I was sort of like, yeah, but if I'm mastering these skills, why am I putting in 3 years?
Yeah, yeah.
Sort of change that dialogue. It was like, well, if I don't see you, you're not working. I'm like, well, the job's getting done. Even mechanisms, Mac, like feedback, where it's like, we will give you that once a year. We'll sit down and we'll
Mhm.
go through everything. We'll give you a score, and then we'll decide, what you're going to be paid and all of that. And I was just like, wait a minute, we're talking about something now. It's something I did last June. And I'm thinking to myself, like, wait a minute, you've been holding this for so long. And it even created skepticism, like, wait, I could have been working on this. So I think,
Yeah, yeah.
a lot of these conversations where I was quick to, and she was sort of trying to figure out who's right, wrong, better, or worse, we just realized, wow, we're coming at this from different places. And on top of it, I really had to appreciate what it was like for a boomer woman,
Hmm.
compared to maybe an X, or for sure millennial and Gen Z woman, to fight for a place at the table. And so she not only taught me a lot about generational differences, but even gender differences that I've seen play out throughout the years.
Oh, great. And I like the fact that it was a female that you mentioned
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
So,
me too.
female and a boomer. So, you had the sex difference, generational difference, but still had some impact on you. All right, sir. So here is my bonus question. It's my trademark question that I ask everyone that comes onto this show. So, as
Uh-oh.
a leader in today's environment, 2023, what are one or two things that pisses you off that you wish that you could change as a leader?
Wow. Okay. That's a really good question. I think so what pisses me off, is that what you said?
What pisses you off, David? What kind of shit just gets under your skin?
Um I would say on the generational front, I will say the
Mhm,
professional front, what I will say is the focus group of one. What I mean by that is this person will say, like, Gen Zers don't do this or that. And I'll be like,
mhm,
well, that's what you think. And so
right.
I think I don't like when someone will speak for a whole generation and think
Mhm,
they're representing themselves, they're representing their generation, when really what they're representing in themselves. It happens to me all the time when I'm
mm,
asked to be part of a panel. And, it happens all the time. A company will think they're really savvy because they'll put a boomer, an Xer, a millennial, and Gen Z and have me moderate it. And,
mhm,
those people are not representing a generation. They're speaking to themselves. And I spend the whole panel correcting them because I look at the data. So what really pisses me off, you're getting under my skin now, Mac. Is when, the focus group of one is when people don't speak to generational data. So when I say to you, Gen Zers this, or millennials that, or Xers or boomers that, I'm speaking to data. And
Yeah.
I might not even agree with it as an extra myself, but I'll speak to the data. So that gets under my skin, would be
Mhm,
the focus group of one. I think, on the personal front, I think this sort of conversation around, work-life balance
uh-huh.
bothers me because there's too much people trying to go for fairness. What I did for one generation, I got to do for another. And if you try to play the fairness game, you will never win. Because what one generation, one person thinks is fair, another one won't. And so I'm
Mhm,
really about focusing on performance and if you're getting the job done. Now, what will piss me off is a lot of people, especially baby boomers, in
mhm,
order for them to go ahead, they to get ahead, they rather had to sort of exceed expectations. Exceed
right.
expectations. So then you'll have someone younger do the job, but they'll get knocked. And I'll be like, but they're doing the job. And they're like, yeah, but they didn't go above and beyond. I go, well, if you wanted them to go above and beyond, then that should have been part of their job description. And I think too
Yeah.
often, everyone's expecting someone to go above and beyond for a company, and that's coming from people who came from a time where there was something as a job contract.
Yeah, yeah.
All these people, especially we're hearing all these tech layoffs right now. We expect these people to go above and beyond, yet they show up to work the next day and suddenly they're out of a job. What are we
Mhm.
doing to show loyalty to them?
Right,
So I
right.
think oftentimes, we sort of say, we want you to do this and we're going to judge you on this. But in our minds, we have the bar set a little bit higher where I think, that's not fair. We should really then say, what do we really
Mhm,
expect of you in terms of, going above and beyond? Because too often the older generations, it was just sort of this unwritten rule that if we
mhm.
say this, what we really mean is come in here. And so those would be a couple of things. I'm sure I could think of a lot more things that piss me off, but probably not appropriate for your show. Are we
So
getting real personal here, Mac?
I love it, man. This is what this show's about. Let's get real. Let's get
Yeah,
real about it. Um, you gave me an idea for a
yeah.
newsletter as you were speaking. You really did. I'll talk to you when we're off air. But yeah, I love your passion and the way it's just bouncing off, and my mind is pinging right now. I'm like, okay, this is some good stuff, man. I can tell you actually mean what the hell you say.
I really
It's
do.
genuine.
And one of the reasons, I wanted to come onto this podcast is what I love about Aunt Edna is that
Mhm.
Aunt Edna stood for certain values that transcend all the generations. And maybe
Right.
some of them, take a different tweak on it. But, Aunt Edna, from what I understand, and I never
Hmm.
had, the honor of knowing her, was that Aunt Edna would have really valued somebody going for work-life blend versus work-life balance. She
Yep.
would have honored, the modern day dad that wants to be home for dinner and wouldn't have called him a wimp because
Yep.
he didn't stay till 8 o'clock till after the boss went home. And so I think, one thing we can really learn from Aunt Edna is core values can, really carry on for each generation, but they might have a little different meaning. And that's what I think, from what I understand of Aunt Edna, she would really not only appreciate, but truly celebrate.
No, I appreciate that, and you're exactly right. Your assessment of her. So I have truly enjoyed our conversation. This has been a really good discussion. I know we'll have many more, in years to come. But I want to turn it over to you for any last minute words, anything you want to say to the watchers, listeners out there about who you are, what you have going on.
I would say, on a personal front, I'm really LinkedIn is a great client of mine, and I'm partnering with them to put a lot more content out there. So feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. I'm always looking to update there on new data, new research, new thoughts, and please, engage in the conversation. But one thing I'm really passionate about, and I put something out there recently, is we have to be open to new paths to success. I think the path to success used to be, you graduate high school, you go to college, you get a job, you move forward, and we have a generation right now where 75% of Gen Z feel there's other ways of getting a good education than going to college.
Yeah, yeah.
And a lot of companies, and you and I talked about this offline, are dropping their requirement, say, for a 4-year degree, and that's great.
Yeah.
And we're starting on paper with that. But let's look at the hearts and minds of people. If you met somebody and you found out they didn't go to college, do you really think the same thing of them as the person who did go to college? And I'll challenge 9 out of 10 times we don't. We assume that, they took a shortcut, or, they're not as hard of a worker. And I'm here to say we've got to be open to new paths to success. There's new ways of learning. There's new ways of succeeding. And it's not right, wrong, better, or worse. But if we're locked into this, you go to high school, you go to college, you maybe go to graduate school and you get a degree. Even Aunt Edna would say, I think, we're limiting ourselves. And so I really want us to open ourselves up to many paths. And while I applaud those companies who have changed it on paper and changed their policy, that's great. Where I'm really seeing the struggle, Mac, is people aren't changing their hearts and minds about those people. And if we're really going to embrace the future workforce, and not only that, win the war for talent, then what we're going to have to do is be open to other paths for success, and that all people can bring something to the table.
Great closing statements, and I agree with everything that you just said. I really do. And the world has changed. I mean, information is readily available. Not like when you and I were coming up, when I had the Michael Jackson Beat It jacket on, and it was school. You had to go to school to get certain levels of education, right? Information is everywhere and in multiple facets. And so I agree with you 100% that we do have to adapt not only how we think about bringing people in, but how we think about the people when they are in. So great closing statements, man.
And am I not wrong? That is definitely part of Aunt Edna's legacy.
Yeah.
When I was reading and everything, that would be her legacy, is that, we've got to continually be willing to change our mind, be open to it, and evolve. And because that would be living her legacy. So in the spirit of this podcast, I think we owe it to ourselves to stop right, wrong, better, or worse, and embrace differences, whether that be not only generations, but for sure race, ethnicity, gender, and all the above. So
yep. Outstanding. So for everyone watching and listening right now, again, don't hit the stop button. We're going to put David's information up on the screen, his wonderful picture there as well. Reach out to him. He's on the speaking engagement tour all over the world. He coaches corporations, executives, so many other things. He can appear and just give opinions on, things that are going on in the world that relates to generational issues. So make sure you reach out to David. I've enjoyed my conversations I've had with him in the last couple of months or so. So again, David, I appreciate you joining the show. For all the listeners out there, make sure you like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Download the podcast on every single major platform that is available out there. And I appreciate you guys, and we will talk to you soon. And with that, may your week be excellent. Thank you for tuning into today's show. And I want to thank David Stillman for being a special guest on today's show. David has multiple books available. He speaks internationally and is a consultant for many organizations. His information is up on the screen right now, so utilize his expertise to help you see things in a different manner. And also, I want to remind you that my book is available right now called My Great Aunt Edna, The Golden Girl of Leadership. You can find it wherever books are sold. And lastly, subscribe to this channel so that you can hear from other great leaders from all around the world on how they can help you in your own leadership journey. And with that, I say thank you. May your week be excellent, and God bless.